The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, we are continuing with our review of the investigators in the Edge of the Earth Investigator expansion. This time around, we're going to take a look at the Mystic/Guardian investigator in the box, Lily Chen. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support. The Arkham Horror LCG community is amazing, and these people have gone above and beyond to bring you content like these investigator reviews. If you'd like to support the channel's goals and see your name on this list, head over to patreon.com, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. That would be awesome. Special thanks to Coleman Rochitty for the amazing art that graces the channel, Nicole Fiskus for the new Whisper in Darkness logo that graces the podcast, and Nate Lost in Time and Space for the intro as well as the overlays. Thank you very much. I couldn't do it without you. Without further ado, let's get started. We are back with our reviews of the investigators in the Edge of the Earth Investigator expansion. This time around, we're taking a look at Lily Chen, the martial artist. Lily is the Mystic/Guardian investigator in the box. She has 3 willpower, 2 intellect, 4 combat, and 3 agility. The Chosen and Warden traits. You begin the game with each discipline in your deck in play, unbroken side face up. Her Elder Sign effect is +2, and after this test ends, flip a broken discipline you control to its unbroken side. She has 7 health and 7 sanity. What do we think about Lily's stat line?
Well, it's a bit deceiving on its face, given that all of the disciplines give you a stat boost. So you're really working with a +1 in some stat of your choosing.
Yeah, that's actually kind of the interesting thing about her is even at 0 XP, she's a 13 stat character. So that puts her up there with like Mark Harrigan and Rita Young and Akachi as like the very few 13th stat characters. That being said, that 13th stat, yeah, we'll get into it more when we talk about the disciplines, but that 13th stat is like basically her special ability. You know, like she doesn't get a once per turn ability like just about every other investigator. So pretty straightforward. Even her intellect of 2 is not completely prohibitive, but from the Mystic card pool, it probably is. It's not great, that's for sure. Other than that, she can do any stat she wants.
Well, Mystic allows you to use your willpower.
Yeah, exactly.
And Guardian does have plenty of ways of boosting willpower on its own, so...
Yeah. So probably the only downside of her stat line is the 2 intellect, but other than that, she can do whatever she wants.
Yeah, and having 7 health and 7 sanity means you can soak a decent amount of stuff, unlike Roland, who's pretty fragile.
That's true.
You know, yeah, Roland can't be your tank, but Lily can tank a decent amount of damage and sanity before she goes down.
Yeah, and she has decent willpower to pass things like Rotting Remains, and I think Mark Harrigan is the only other one. A Guardian with 3 agility base. And...
I believe that's correct.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And the fact that you can give her a discipline to start her off at 4 agility, that kind of puts her in like a class of her own when it comes to Guardians, like an actual agility Guardian.
Yeah, and we had talked about cards like Sweeping Kick that Lily could really utilize, and if you wanted to go with like Butterfly Swords, that's another option too. Having 4 agility is also nice because you can also just evade certain enemies that you don't want to have to spend 2 actions killing. So you can just evade it, let it sit at a location, and then kill something of higher priority.
Yeah, and that's very unusual for a Guardian.
Yeah, most Guardians are, it has to die, or I have no other options. And with Lily, she at least has the option of possibly escaping something she either can't kill or doesn't want to waste the time killing, which is pretty unusual for a guardian investigator. Yep. Naturally, Lily's abilities depend a lot on the disciplines. There are 4 of them, 1 for each stat. The first one is Discipline Alignment of Spirit. It has the Unbroken trait, as all the disciplines do. Lily Chen deck only, it is a permanent. You get +1 willpower. As an action, she can take 1 damage to heal 3 horror, or take 1 direct horror to heal 3 damage, and then she flips the asset over. The opposite side has the Broken trait, again Lily Chen deck only and a permanent. As a response, after the round ends, if you took no damage or horror this round, flip this asset over to its unbroken side. Now, Discipline Alignment of Spirit pumps up Lily's willpower to 4, which is pretty good for a Mystic. She's not certainly not in the class of Agnes or Akachi, but 4 is a pretty good spot to be in. The ability to heal horror or damage makes her pretty tanky, and it also helps against the new weaknesses that we saw in the Edge of the Earth Investigator expansion that require you to actually heal damage or horror to get rid of them. The unbroken or the broken side isn't that hard to actually flip back over as long as you don't take damage or horror. You can flip it anytime, so that's pretty good. I have to say that looking through all of or many of the Lily decks over on Arkham DB, this seems to be the default choice for disciplines, at least at pre-campaign.
That's an interesting choice, because I feel like this is the middle of the campaign choice.
I agree.
Personally, because you don't really need a lot of healing until the middle of the campaign once you've taken a couple of trauma. And then by that point, the treacheries also tend to get nastier, as well as the bag, so having that extra willpower becomes much more crucial at that point in the campaign. Whereas early on, you have plenty of soak, and you can usually handle a trauma or two, but once the middle of the campaign gets by, you really need that extra boost.
I wonder if the logic is that at 0 XP, she's primarily a Mystic, so I wonder if the builders are loading her up with things like Shriveling and Holy Rosary, maybe David Renfeld. So they're going for the Rite of Seeking or Sixth Sense Mystic, where she uses Shriveling and for her damage and not so much her combat.
Yeah, that's the sense I got looking at the decks, that picking this discipline isn't so much for the special ability, but it's for almost solely that +1 willpower, so that she has a 4, so she can leverage whichever Mystic asset she is going to be using to discover clues. Usually Sixth Sense, although I have seen Clairvoyance in there and others. So, and I should note that when I did play Lily, when she was initially spoiled months and months and months ago, I did not start with this one, and I was sort of playing the Mystic-based investigation Lily, and I kind of regretted it, to be honest. I kind of missed that +1 willpower, because 3 is okay, but I think the Mystic, those Mystic spells that help you investigate sort of assume that you're at a 4 or 5, and being at a 3, I think I might have had David Renfield in play, so that helped a little bit, but obviously having a 5 is better than a 4, so I did kind of miss that one. So I do understand to an extent that why players would choose this one over the other ones if they're going that way, but I was kind of surprised, just sort of skimming the decks, that this one seemed to be the choice that most people were going for at the start of campaigns.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I played Lily and did pretty much exactly the same thing in our recent run through of Edge of the Earth, and I didn't really miss it at all. I found that with the combination of Rosary and Renfield, you just had enough with a skill card. I wasn't the primary investigator in our 2-player game, so I really just needed Clairvoyance to pass a couple of times just to be able to pick up enough clues, and it worked fine.
So that being said, regardless of the choice to start with this one, I have to say, having action-based healing, Mr. Lang, having action-based healing ready to go whenever you want, actually kind of nice. If you get smacked around by a tentacle on a rotting remains and you're down to 2 horror, 2 sanity, it's nice to take a single action, no matter what's in your hand, no matter what you've already put on the board, and heal it back up.
Well, that sort of healing I don't have an issue with, where it's already on the table from the beginning of the game, and all you have to do is take 1 action to do it. It's not like you have to play an asset and then trigger that asset and pay a bunch of resources. Yeah. It's good to go. So while it is a healing card, I don't have an issue with Lily's discipline.
I see the farther we go, the more nuanced your take on healing cards becomes.
I think the rule of thumb seems to be that if it's healing tacked with another effect, it's pretty good. Otherwise, if it's just healing on its own, it's not good.
The second discipline is the Quiescence of Thought. Again, same game text as the previous one. This one gives Lily +1 intellect, so bumping her from a 2 to a 3. As an action, if you have fewer than 5 cards in your hand, draw cards until there are 5 in your hand. Flip this asset over. And then on the broken side, as a response after the round ends, if your hand did not have 2 or more cards in it at any point this round, you can flip this asset over to its unbroken side. So basically, if you have 0 or 1 cards in your hand at any point during the round, you can flip it back. And then theoretically, you're using that action again to draw 5 cards to refill your hand and get into that sort of cycle. What do we think about this one?
This one's tough to evaluate. I feel like if you were playing a deck that could draw through a bunch of skills,
Yeah.
and use the skills over and over, and you could kind of like flip this like back and forth, because the +1 intellect is pretty negligible. Like Lily can't really utilize that a lot, so I feel like you're mostly using this one for the ability, and I can see that there's potential there.
It might not quite be there yet, but I see some potential for like this kind of janky Lily deck that relies on investigations.
Or even
like
events.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
of
you
course.
use it to draw through events, yeah.
Yeah, if you use it for the draw, I can definitely see something like that going, where you're playing fast action assets and events. One thing that's worth noting about this, it says after the round ends, if you do not have 2 or more cards in it, that is after upkeep. So if you go into upkeep with 1 card in your hand, you draw a second one, you will not get to flip this thing back over. That means you essentially have to have an empty hand going into upkeep.
That probably means you also have to have a discard outlet, which how many of those does Survivor or Guardian and Mystic have? I don't know. I don't remember, honestly.
Yeah, she's not exactly a survivor.
Yeah. It's a cool ability, though.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I mean,
like
take an action, draw up to, theoretically you're drawing 5 cards, right?
Yeah.
Or up to 5. So if you end the upkeep with 1 card, you're going to draw 4, more than likely.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So take an action, draw 4. There aren't many cards in the game that let you do that outside of Seeker. So that's really good, especially in Guardian. There's no, Guardians get maybe 1 or 2 cards max, and then they have to work for that pretty hard a lot of the time, either by like killing enemies or doing something else. Mm-hmm. In the case of something like Taunt, engaging a bunch of enemies will get you cards, but yeah, it's not easy for Guardians to draw this many cards. I think there is a deck that could utilize the ability pretty well. The intellect to me is, I just don't see Lily being a mystic. I just don't see her using that intellect outside of dealing with treacheries. So it's not, and 3 isn't really going to help her much more than 2 is. So that seems negligible. I think you could build a deck where, if you, like you guys say, if you can get into a cycling where you're where you're flipping this thing back and forth as often as you can, you could get a pretty, maybe there's a deck there that can do it consistently. And I think you're right. You would need either events that she's burning through or skills in order to be committing them to both her skill tests as well as others. From a solo perspective, this one seems maybe a little hard to use if you're. I'd have to test it and see, but I find that my solo decks tend to, when I play anyway, my hand starts to creep up as the game goes on, and so I don't think I would get a whole lot of use out of this unless you did build a deck that was focused strictly on cycling your hand as quickly as possible.
Yep. One thing to note, though, is that how do you justify running this as your 0 XP choice over one of the others? That's the hard part. And I think the way to do it is the fact that that's the best art, I think, of the 4. So Because it's look at that. She's like standing on one foot. She's like flexing, she's flexing her muscles. She is showing her biceps in that pose right there, right, guys? And on top of that, she's like getting really flexible. So, I mean, she's showing off her limberness and her massive biceps in that part.
I think you justify it by building a deck around it.
Oh, or you could do that.
I think the other problem with that deck is that this costs an action. You draw up to 5, and then you have 2 actions left. So in solo, that's basically untenable. Because you have no real way to generate enough actions to make this useful turn after turn. Unless you have some ridiculous way to recycle police badge or something like that.
Yeah, because I think if you were to say flip it, you draw, say you had 1 card in your hand, you draw 4, you're up to 5. It's going to take you probably a turn, maybe 2 turns, possibly even more to get back down to 0 cards. So the number of times that you can cycle during a typical scenario is going to be limited.
Yeah, maybe that's the way to go, is to just not think of this as like an engine to draw lots of cards, or just think of it as once per game, I'm going to get to refill my hand. So what'll end up happening then is you just think, all right, well, I don't really need the intellect boost. It's just when I end up down at 0, I can refill back up to 5, and then I just leave it on the broken side for the rest of the game, and I'm okay with that. Maybe that's the way to think. Maybe that's the way to use it. Just once per game.
I mean, that would be good toward the end of a scenario, right? Knowing that you've got that refill in your back pocket. It's like, okay, I'm playing mid to late game. We're in the final push. I might be low on cards in hand. Bang, I'm back up to 5, and then you've got enough to basically see you to the end of the scenario, and that's it. So probably not the first choice you want to make when you're building your Lily deck at level 0. I think one of the other disciplines is more attractive than this one, but I could see picking this one up probably much later once you've gained some experience points and you do get to add another discipline to your deck. If you're finding that you're struggling in the card draw department, then Lily has access to an effect that can draw her cards. The combat discipline is Prescience of Fate, same text as the others. You get +1 combat, which bumps Lily up to a 5. As an action, you get +5 skill value for the next skill test you perform this turn. Important to note that is not necessarily a combat skill test. You can use that for any skill test. After that skill test ends, flip this asset over. This action does not provoke attacks of opportunity. And the broken side is the response is after the round ends, if you performed no skill tests this round, flip this asset over to its unbroken side. Now, obviously bumping Lily up to a 5 combat is pretty nice natively right at the beginning of the game. Then she can later pick up Beat Cop to go to a 6 if she wants, or any of the, I think there's combat training as well that can further boost her combat. Getting +5 skill value for any skill test you want is pretty nice. It is an action, so you have to actually plan to use this. You can't use it, say, on a treachery you draw during the Mythos phase. You actually need to be taking a skill test. The solo player in me really wonders how I would flip this back, because that response, if you perform no skill test this round, flip it over, that might be a little tricky in solo, because I don't think there are many turns where I am not doing some sort of skill test or another.
I have found in multiplayer that there are rounds where you'll get a breather. So what I think this one's really good for is, first of all, it's your 5th combat point, and that's why you're taking it, is to be at 5 combat. And then I think it's really useful for you're running out of ammo, or you're just running out of skill icons in hand, and you just need to I need to land this vicious blow punch, and just take out this last bad guy, and then I could breathe for a while. And I think that's what this is useful for. Either that or to land like a key evade. Like say against a massive enemy or against like the Harbinger. Something where you really need to land this evade and it has alert and it's just bad news if you fail this. And then get the heck out of there.
Yeah, I think outside of that, I don't really see you like flipping this thing back and forth.
Yeah.
That's not really going to happen. But I mean, 5 combat is 5 combat.
Yeah, I think that's the main draw here.
Yeah, and then, I mean, that +5 skill value, if you're using it for combat, bumps you up to 10, which in most cases, only a tentacle is going to cause you problems at that point. Even her agility, I mean, she's sitting at an 8, which is very, very good. I can see in multiplayer where you could actually get a breather and actually hope to sort of flip this back over. It seems like in solo, this is basically like miss a turn, which that's a pretty big ask in a solo game. I'm not really inclined to do that. So 5 combat, I mean, that's what most Guardians want. So, and this gives it to you from the very beginning of the game. So no complaints there.
Yeah, I mean, in solo though, that last boss punch is really critical, and having that escape button is pretty nice. So
Yeah. The last thing you want to do is miss an attack against the Ghoul Priest and then get retaliated and then get attacked.
Mhm.
Ugh, that's
Yeah,
what
I was just thinking of the Ghoul Priest, how nice it would be to have that. Usually that is the most, if you've played the Gathering quite a few times, I think, which all of us have at this point, that final attack against the Ghoul Priest is with like the third action, your final action of your turn. The game is on the line. You either land this attack or the Ghoul Priest is going to counterattack, or it's going to retaliate one and then it's going to attack you again. That can get pretty tense, and having +5 skill value on that attack is pretty nice.
Because oftentimes in solo, you'll end up in that situation where the boss needs 2 or even 3 attacks, and you have enough skill icons for 2 of the attacks or 1 of the attacks, but not the other. And then this just comes in and saves the day for you, which is nice.
The final discipline is the agility discipline, balance of body. You get +1 agility, and as an action, 1 at a time, take up to 3 different fight or evade actions. Flip this asset over. This action does not provoke attacks of opportunity. And on the reverse side, as a response, after the round ends, if no enemies were at the same location as you at any point this round, flip this asset over to its unbroken side. This is the discipline that I have experience playing with, and it's a lot of fun to trigger this thing, and you can string together an insane number of attacks between this and some of the cards in the Guardian card pool, notably the ones that were released in the Nathaniel Cho starter deck, like 1-2 punch and stuff like this. You can get 5-6 attacks between this card and some of the other cards that are available. And I know I played, I think it was Blood on the Altar, and poor Silas at the end just got pummeled before he had a chance to act. So moved into the hidden chamber, triggered this and a bunch of the other cards that I had, and I don't think I needed all those attacks. I think I landed 3 and that was enough, but I had many more in my toolbox. So what do you guys think about this one?
This one is by far my favorite.
Oh yeah, this is the Chun-Li flips out and just kills a lot of people. You know, one. This is great.
It's nice that it also kind of supports itself as well, because worst comes to worst, if you don't have like a third fight action, then you can always just evade something.
Yes.
And giving you that +1 agility is really nice in that aspect.
Yeah.
And I find that this one's actually pretty easy to flip over, because you spend those 3 actions dealing with whatever's on the board, and then if you don't draw anything the following round, it just flips back over and you're good to go.
That being said, in 4-player especially, you can go the whole game without it ever flipping over. If you're following your friends around, if any of those friends draw an enemy in the Mythos phase, this is not flipping over that turn. So it's like, not only do you have to not draw an enemy, but the friends you're following around also have to not draw an enemy. Yeah, so you got to be careful.
Yeah, that would require some workaround. You'd sort of need Lily to kill the stuff, and then the other players to say, okay, we need to move away from Lily for this turn, just in case, so she can flip this back over the following turn and then catch up with us or stuff like that. I could see that being a... It is worth noting that her Elder Sign effect does give you an auto flip, which is important. So even if you do flip this and the situation, or any of these disciplines, and you end up in a situation where you simply are unable to flip them back, chances are you're going to draw one Elder Sign a game at least, so you'll likely get to flip back, but that's not something you could really prepare for. Mystics do have access to quite a bit of Chaos Bag manipulation, but I don't think that's really what Lily is going to be leaning into. She's a guardian at heart, and so she's probably going to be focusing more on killing stuff than actually trying to trigger her Elder Sign repeatedly.
This discipline has saved my bacon more times than I can count already. It's really handy to have, because there's just so many situations where, you know, both players draw an enemy. Speaking in two-player, where you both draw an enemy, and one player is equipped to deal with one of them, but not the other one. So you end up just engaging, and then you can use this thing to just clear the board and then move forward. It's so good.
Yeah, I mean it kind of speaks to the core of what like Arkham Horror is, where it'll present challenges where you have to accomplish more than 3 actions worth of effort in a turn, whether you're surrounded by enemies or you need to hurry up and get clues before the agenda flips over. And this like directly attacks, you know, that action compression problem of needing to get more than 3 actions of effort done. You know, like let's say, and this happens a lot, especially in multiplayer, because like the variability of the encounter deck is much higher in multiplayer, and like the number of different combinations of things that get thrown on the board. And you can often get to a point where, okay, I've got like 2 hunters and I've got this boss on me. All right, what do I do? You know, and this is where this saves the day. Also, the fact that you have to make 3 different fighter evade actions, that really encourages you to play events, in my experience, like Sweeping Kick, which we mentioned earlier, because those all count as events with the fight keyword on them, count as fight actions. So there's a lot of fun stuff you can do with like chain together like weird things, and then you can use the events to get even more than 3 fighter evade actions worth of effort out of this ability, and it's just tons of fun.
So do you guys think there's a deck where you play a bunch of events and you pack this discipline, and then maybe you grab the intellect one, 15 experience in, and now you have this engine to like draw through and just go Bruce Lee on people?
Kind of like Nathaniel Cho. Yeah, where Nathaniel Cho, he had his boxing gloves as his draw engine. Lily with the intellect discipline as her draw engine. There are a lot of Guardian events that have fight on them.
And there are a lot of good Guardian skill cards.
Yeah.
Daring, defensive stance, steadfast. I mean, you know, Sweeping Kick, etc., etc.
Especially once you get things like Fang of Turnathlaw, you know, you know which one I'm talking about. When you get that later, that opens up a whole realm of possibilities. You know, when you teleport across the board mid flurry, like
that could be cool. You're like punching one thing at one location and then Fang to another location.
Yep. Yes, probably some hilarious stuff you can do there. So yeah, I think once XP comes into it, I think you could make that work. Yeah, where you're event based and you use the intellect discipline to refill your hand once or twice a game.
Speaking of deck construction, that brings us to the backside of Lily Chen. Deck size 30, deck building options, Mystic cards level 0, Guardian cards level 1 to 5, neutral cards level 0 to 5, and up to 5 other Guardian cards level 0. Her deck building requirements include her signature, her discipline, which you get to pick, and then her signature weakness, Burden of Destiny. She can't use firearms, no real surprise there, and I mean, fortunately, she doesn't really need to, so that's basically doesn't really affect her all that much. Her additional requirements, you do have to pick a discipline, and then for every 15 experience points you've earned in total, you get to choose and add a different discipline asset to your deck, which of course starts the game in play. So as you gain experience through the campaign, you start with one discipline. At 15, you go up to 2. At 30, you go up to 3. And if you somehow manage to accumulate a massive 45 XP, then you can have all 4 in play. I don't think I've ever built a deck that has 45 XP in it, but
Forgotten age, baby.
I think if you get 2 or even 3 of these disciplines, you're going to be doing pretty well. Now, Lily, like all of the investigators in this box, she starts off as a mystic, then becomes a guardian as she gains experience points. I find when I sat down to build a Lily Chen deck, now this was before they made the change to how the multi-class cards work. So back when multi-class cards were first released, they actually counted against your slots. So choosing those 5 guardian cards, I think, can be pretty tough. There are a lot of very, very good level 0 guardian cards that lend themselves naturally to that, all other guardians sort of just take for granted. It's just like, oh, I need my weapon, I just put a prepared for the worst in there. I need good weapons, I just play Enchanted Blade, and et cetera, et cetera. But with Lily, she only gets 5 at the start, and I think that was the thing I found to be quite challenging.
I think the way to deal with that is to not run beat cops in particular, because I think she can get, if you start her off with 5 combat, I think she can avoid some of the basics, like beat cop. Vicious Blow is a harder one to let go of.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, Vicious Blow and Take the Initiative. Like, Guardians have so many good level 0 skills.
And Daring. Oh, man, you're right.
Yeah, she's very, those 5 Guardian slots just, I mean, there's so many, like Vicious Blow for one. It's like, that's pretty much a staple in every Guardian deck. And here it's actually like, do I actually leave this in the box?
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you get 5, but you're actually probably going to play 2.5 cards because you're going to play 2 Vicious Blows, which leaves you with 3 cards. So then you're picking something else and then maybe 1 other card. Man, I don't envy Lily deck builders to have to sort of sit down and pick which Guardian which Guardian cards they're going to run with.
I think those Guardian slots really have to be reserved for things that you can't get otherwise. I think, like, Prepared for the Worst, I think, is a good one of in most Lily decks, because that's just not an effect you get otherwise. And what Guardian doesn't need their weapon? Lily included, I think, in that statement. Because I don't think you're building her very battle mage heavy. You're going to play something like the Hammer or the Time Worn Brand or the Holy Spear. And you're not going to mess with anything else. So
I think this is where the Dragon Pole starts to come into play, because the Dragon Pole doesn't take up one of her Guardian slots.
The Lily Chen build that people seem to be gravitating to is choosing the willpower discipline, using that willpower discipline to power cards like Sixth Sense to cover the investigation, using Dragon Pole and filling those arcane slots with things like Sixth Sense, and then some other cheap mystic asset. I've seen things like Alchemical Transmutation Index. I've seen things like Scrying Index. I'm not a huge fan of that idea. It just feels like, and if you do read the deck guides, usually those are the first cards that are being upgraded out of. It's just basically like, I need something to fill a slot at that point. And so you're using your mystic cards to handle the investigation, and then you're usually upgrading. Once you've gained your experience and you're upgrading out of the Dragon Pole into whichever big weapon you happen to favor, whether that's the Cyclopean Hammer from the Edge of the Earth or the Holy Spear from the Innsmouth Conspiracy cycle. And then, or even, there's probably butterfly knives or a choice you could make as well. So you're upgrading out of Dragon Pole into those. And then I think Lily tends to sort of favor, if you're going the big weapon route, she tends to favor the traditional Guardian upgrade paths where you're looking at things like stick to the plan. Maybe Lily even likes Vicious Blow 2. It's sometimes it's not, I don't know how many Guardians are attracted to Vicious Blow 2, but for Lily it's actually probably a good thing. But I mean, between, say, stick to the plan and a big weapon, there's a massive amount of experience right there that you're committing to that.
Yeah,
True.
that's 16 alone right there, which is a second discipline. So
That
you
being
have
said,
that to look forward to.
That being said, I faintly remember when we were discussing the Edge of the Earth cards, noting that there might be a path for using like 2 XP butterfly knives and maybe dragon pole, and then just forgoing the big weapon and relying on events like Fang of Turnatha. That might be another viable path to take, where you use the dragon pole and maybe butterfly knives like the whole way, and you rely on
Certainly
leveled
possible.
events.
I think
So like sweeping kick and the Fang and
you're exchanging the big hits of the big weapons for multiple smaller hits with things like butterfly knives, and then Lily's discipline. Sweeping kick is another good one.
Or Get Over Here level 2. I love that card. Very, very underrated, but also costs XP.
I ended up solving the 5 slots in a bit of a different way. I ended up taking In the Thick of It, which I know very controversial, but I took In the Thick of It for 2 copies of Brand of Cthulhu as the second spell slot, because it was cheap and it was an off weapon. Yeah. So I at least had a way to deal 2 damage when the Dragon Pole wasn't online. And it's nice for the agility discipline, because you need a second thing to fight with, so that was my second thing to fight with. And then I used the last experience for a copy of Ever Vigilant, having that at Scenario 1. Very nice. and then from there, I took Safeguard, which I felt was a pretty good choice. And then from there, I think I ended up taking 2 skills. But, I feel like if you're going to go with stick to the plan, then having prepared for the worst as a 1-of, and then picking 2 other cards for 2-ofs is a pretty smart plan. Because then you always have access to that prepared for the worst later on.
Spending 1 XP to add a prepared for the worst to your deck, like, that's not bad. I know a lot of players are loath to spend XP on level 0 cards, but when you only have 5 slots and there's some good utility out of those slots that you could be asking for, maybe it's worth spending a few XP to shuffle those in. Yeah, those nice like Daring, for example. That's worth an XP.
Yeah, and my debate was like, I could have taken the time to upgrade into Safeguard level 2, which is very good, but in 2-player, how useful is it? And I think I prioritized getting weapons and getting Enchanted Weapon over wanting to spend experience on movement. So I think that's another thing you have to consider in those 5 slots as well, is like, what am I going to realistically be able to upgrade into? And how much experience am I going to have?
Yeah, I think that's part of the power of In the Thick of It with the investigators in this box, and that because they're so limited, they, all of them only have those 5 cards from the class that they are going to be upgrading into, that In the Thick of It basically lets them, I guess, skip the queue in a way and say, okay, normally I would take Vicious Blow, but if I pick In the Thick of It, I can get Vicious Blow 2, which then frees up one of those level 5 or those level 0 slots that normally I'd have Vicious Blow in. Now I just don't have to worry about that, and I can branch out a little bit more than you expected to.
Yeah, if your card pool is really thin, then In the Thick of It can help you like get over the line, and with things like in Lily, you can take 2 sweeping kicks and a defensive stance just to like get your deck up to 30. I can see that being handy, at the start of a campaign.
So the flavor of the month right now is Lily with the Cyclopean Hammer, basically starting off Dragon Pole and then building up to Cyclopean Hammer and just having big hits. Matt, you wanted to talk about Holy Spear as an option.
I like the Holy Spear. I actually recently played Lily all the way through Return to the Forgotten Age, and we were kind of an off-brand team, and there was just enough blessing in the group to make Holy Spear work really well. But the reason why I want to call out Holy Spear specifically for Lily is that it works really well with her agility discipline because it has two different attacks on the card. If I do the flurry, I can do one of the strikes can be the 3 damage Holy Spear attack. Another one of the 3 strikes can be the 2 damage Holy Spear attack. There's then I only need one event or something, or one Brand of Cthulhu to finish it off. I think there's that extra little bit of usefulness out of the Holy Spear. Plus, it's a spear. It's got some kung fu. It's it's a kung fu spear. How about that? There you go.
Yeah, it's definitely a very good weapon if your team is willing to support it. And that's the big crux of it is that the hammer doesn't require any support.
It's true. The hammer is pretty great on its own, especially once Lily's up to 2 disciplines. Yeah, she could be up to 7, 8, 9. Yeah, just 9 on the hammer, just from willpower and combat alone. No additional buffs. Pretty good.
Right now, if you take a look at Arkham DB, there seems to be a pretty sizable number of decks that are going the Cyclopean hammer route. But I think there are other viable options for Lily if you want to, say, avoid the big weapon, big hit, and focus more on the agility discipline and just go for as many hits as you can and not dealing quite as much damage as the hammer, but sort of getting up to that amount of damage gradually. I think that's another way you could do it. But I mean, at this point in the card pool, Guardians tend to be pretty focused on just gaining a bunch of weapons or getting their weapon of choice and then going ham. Now I think you might also be able to build into Lily's ability to soak a lot with her willpower discipline. That is a sub-theme of the Guardian class, being able to take damage for other investigators at the table. So if Lily was to branch out into those cards and then use her discipline to sort of say, okay, I'm going to soak a bunch on me and allies, then I'm going to heal using my discipline, and then I'm good to go. I think that's a viable option as well if you're interested in maybe not going for the biggest weapon in the group and diversifying a little bit.
Yeah, there might be something there if you because Lily has access to David Renfeld, Arcane Initiate. Both are cheap allies that you kind of want to soak damage or horror for you. She also has access to Tetsuo Mori, another guy that you want to take damage or horror for you. She has access to Medical Student, which is pretty nice. And I think if you're doing the drag
as well,
Brother Xavier, that's right. She has access to that. She also has access to a pretty underused card called Spiritual Resolve from the Dream Eaters. That's the Myriad card that you put one of them into play. It has 3 health and 3 sanity, and then you can discard an additional copy from your hand to heal it up. I think there might be something there as well because it takes up an arcane slot, Dragon Pole.
Yeah, I mean, even Flesh Ward is a decent option as well. If you want to take one of those just to have something to soak a little bit of extra damage and fill that arcane slot, it's not a terrible option.
Fun fact, Flesh Ward works really well on Pit Vipers.
So yeah, when if you sit down to build your Lily deck, take a look at the options, and I think as far as investigators go, she's got some interesting builds there that can be quite appealing, especially if you're playing in multiplayer and you want to be the martial arts defender who takes on the onrushing hordes of enemies, taking all of the damage and then just healing it all off as your team carries on their way. We've already talked about her signature assets because of all the disciplines. We have her signature weakness, Burden of Destiny. Weakness, flaw, revelation. You must either choose one, flip a discipline you control to its broken side. It cannot flip back this round, or take 1 damage and 1 horror.
Yeah, if you're already taking a whole bunch of damage and horror, can be a pain in the butt. Where it really gets to be a pain in the butt, but though, is when you have 3 of them in your deck, and that's 3 draws. You're losing.
Right. That is the thing, that you
Yeah.
have to add one of these for each discipline that you have. So
The real trap here is if you decide to go play a standalone game, and you decide to go whole hog with Lily and take 39 XP and take. Nope, you can't take all 4 with 39 XP. But you get the idea. You take like as many disciplines as you can, and you go like 39 or 49 XP. You're gonna have a lot of weaknesses in that deck. And I don't think if you don't play standalone very often, you may not be ready to have 6 or 7 weaknesses in your deck, just from like a draws or bad perspective. Yeah.
Almost when you just play versatile to pad out your deck.
So it can be kind of nasty, especially if you're also trying to you're building yourself up to take a whole bunch of damage. Hitting a Burden of Destiny can be kind of mean. That being said, I think one of the best Guardian cards in the game, I've had worse level 2, is like even better for Lily because it can just turn this thing into 2 resources. Nice to have a bit more control over a bit more control over the opportunity to gain 2 resources off of I've had worse level 2. So it kind of helps there. It's easily dealt with, but the nasty part of Burden of Destiny is the fact that you're going to end up with 2 or 3 of them pretty quickly.
I guess the other issue with this is that it's not direct damage or horror, which is, if this was direct damage and direct horror, then I'd be a lot more concerned about it.
You'd be reaching for that willpower discipline, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I feel like the design of these kind of makes you do that anyway, because you can just
that's true.
tank damage and horror and then just heal it with the willpower one. So yeah, kind of like nullifies itself a little bit. Honestly, in the times that I've played Lily, I've never really had this be an issue. Even when I've had 2 or 3 in my deck, it's never really come up.
That's going to do it for our look at Lily Chen, the martial artist. Have you had a chance to play Lily? Let us know in the comments down below how that went and any other interesting builds that you have found. We'd love to hear from you. Any final thoughts on Lily?
So I think in the time that we've talked about Lily, we've come across, seems like 2 or 3 distinct different builds for her. There's the event or skill-heavy focused build where you use the intellect and the agility disciplines to draw through your deck and sort of like flurry of blows enemies with events. And then there is the version of that where you use like butterfly knives and maybe a couple spells to kind of do the same thing. And then there was the Cyclopean Hammer, hit things with one giant punch style of Lily deck. But I mean, overall, they're all very combat-centric focused, which makes sense for a Guardian.
Yeah, we also even briefly mentioned the Juggernaut version where you just have lots and lots of soak and the ability to heal up as well. Lily's fun. Yeah, just the fact that you can like start off with a stat boost. You get to and you get to choose which one it is. That leads to that already creates some creativity right there.
I have to say that Lily has always been one of my favorite characters in the Arkham Horror Files line, and I'm really pleased with how she came out here in the Arkham Horror LCG. So many of her, if you look back at Arkham Horror 2nd edition or Eldritch Horror, her ability was just sort of like heal damage or take damage to heal horror or take horror to heal damage. Not that interesting. We do see that on her willpower discipline, but there are 4 disciplines to choose from, and I'm really happy that Maxine and Jeremy sort of really created one of the more, I think, interesting investigators to build a deck around. You've got a lot of choices to make in terms of disciplines. The card pool is the Mystic Guardian combination is very, very interesting. And I think she turned out really, really well.
Yeah, it's interesting how we've had 3 different investigators, all with versions of Guardian and Mystic, and they all feel very different from one another.
Oh, right.
Yeah, we had Sister Mary back in Innsmouth, and she's sort of the Blessed Guardian Mystic. We had Diana Stanley back in the Circle Undone, and she focuses more on cancellation and stacking cards underneath her to boost her willpower. And now Lily is, I guess, sort of a straightforward, I'm going to hit stuff Guardian, but the fact that she has that agility option to boost her agility up to 4 and then actually be able to evade something, and then you throw in Daring in there to give her another boost, that's pretty nice.
Yeah, plus with Mystic Weapons and Guardian spells, we're starting to see some opportunities to blend the two classes together.
That's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoyed what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.